This is part 2 of the 18th chapter, Ocular Injuries. Let's continue with management of retained intraocular foreign bodies. Diagnosis. It is a matter of extreme importance, particularly as the patient is often unaware that a particle has entered the eye. To come to a correct diagnosis, following steps should be taken. History. A careful history about the mode of injury may give a clue about the type of intraocular foreign body. Second, ocular examination. A thorough ocular examination with slit lamp, including gonioscopy, should be carried out. The signs which may give some indication of IOFB are subconjunctival hemorrhage, corneal scar, holes in the iris, and opaque track through the lens. With clear media, sometimes IOFB may be seen on ophthalmoscopy in the vitreous or on the retina. IOFB lodged in the angle of anterior chamber may be visualized by gonioscopy. Third, plain X-rays orbit. Anteroposterior and lateral views are still being used for location of IOFB as most foreign bodies are radio opaque. However, several workers feel there is no use of plain film radiology, as CT images are required for suspected IOFB even if PFR is negative. TFR is plain film radiology. Localization of IOFB. Once the intraocular foreign body is suspected clinically and later confirmed on fundus examination and or X-rays, its exact location is mandatory to plan the proper removal. Following techniques may be used. Radiographic localization. Before the advent of ultrasonography and CT scan, different specialized radiographic techniques were used to localize the IOFBs, which are now obsolete. However, simple limbal ring method, which was used in the past, is described below. Limbal ring method. It is simple but nowadays sparingly employed technique. A metallic ring of the corneal diameter is stitched at the limbus and X-rays are taken. One exposure is taken in the anteroposterior view. In the lateral view, 3 exposures are made, one each while the patient is looking straight, upwards and downwards respectively. The position of the foreign body is estimated from its relationship with the metallic ring in different positions. Second, ultrasonographic B-scan localization. It is being used increasingly these days. It can tell the position of base metallic and non-metallic, non-radio-opaque foreign bodies. Further, USB also helps in noting the associated conditions like retinal detachment, vitreous and suprachoroidal hemorrhages, and vitreous incarceration in coats of eyeball at the site of perforation. CT scan with axial and coronal cuts. CT scan is presently the best method of IOFB localization. It provides cross-sectional images with sensitivity and specificity that are superior to plain radiography and ultrasonography. Magnetic resonance imaging (MRI) is not recommended as a general screening tool since it can cause further damage by producing movement of the magnetic foreign body. So MRI is contraindicated in the presence of metallic intraocular foreign bodies. However, after the CT has excluded the presence of a metallic foreign body, MRI has a special role in localizing small plastic or wooden IO foreign bodies. Treatment. IOFB should always be removed except when it is inert and probably sterile, when little damage has been done to the vision, and the process of removal may be risky and destroy sight, like a minute foreign body in the retina. Removal of magnetic intraocular foreign body is easier than the removal of non-magnetic. Usually, a handheld electromagnet is used for the removal of magnetic foreign body. Method of removal depends upon the site location of the IOFB as follows. Foreign body in the anterior chamber. It is removed through the corresponding corneal incision directed straight towards the foreign body. It should be 3 mm internal to the limbus and in the quadrant of the cornea lying over the foreign body. Magnetic foreign body is removed with a handheld magnet. It may come out with a gush of aqueous. Non-magnetic foreign body is picked up with toothless forceps. Foreign body entangled in the iris tissue, magnetic as well as non-magnetic, is removed by performing sector iridectomy of the part containing foreign bodies. Foreign body in the lens. Magnetic extraction is usually difficult for intralenticular foreign bodies. Therefore, magnetic foreign body should also be treated as non-magnetic foreign body. An extracapsular cataract extraction with intraocular lens implantation should be performed. The foreign body may be evacuated itself along with the lens matter or may be removed with the help of forceps. Foreign body in the vitreous and the retina is removed by the posterior route as follows. Magnetic removal. This technique is used to remove a magnetic foreign body that can be well localized and removed safely with a powerful magnet without causing much damage to the intraocular structures. An intravitreal foreign body is preferably removed through a pars plana sclerectomy, 5 mm from the limbus. At the site chosen for incision, the conjunctiva is deflected and the incision is given in the sclera concentric to the limbus. A pre-placed suture is passed and lips of the wound are retracted. A nick is given in the underlying pars plana part of the ciliary body and the foreign body is removed with the help of a powerful handheld electromagnet. Pre-placed suture is tied to close the scleral wound. Conjunctiva is stitched with a one or two interrupted sutures. For an intraretinal foreign body, the site of incision should be as close to the foreign body as possible. A trapdoor scleral flap is created and the choroidal bed is treated with diathermy. Choroid is incised and foreign body is removed with either forceps or external magnet. Forceps removal with pars plana vitrectomy. This technique is used to remove all non-magnetic foreign bodies and those magnetic foreign bodies that cannot be safely removed with a magnet. In this technique, the foreign body is removed with vitreous forceps after performing 3-pore pars plana vitrectomy under direct visualization using an operating microscope. Now we are going to read about extraocular lesions. Extraocular or periocular injuries may or may not be associated with ocular injuries. These may be caused by blunt trauma and sharp trauma. Extraocular lesions caused by blunt trauma. These include conjunctival lesions, which include subconjunctival hemorrhage occurs very commonly. It appears as a bright red spot. Chemosis and lacerating wounds of conjunctiva are also not uncommon. Eyelid lesions include ecchymosis of eyelids is of frequent occurrence because of loose subcutaneous tissue. Blood collects easily into the lids and produces black eye. Ecchymosis of eyelids may characteristically appear as bilateral ring hematomas, panda eyes. In patients with basal skull fracture, laceration and avulsion of the lids, traumatic ptosis may follow damage to the levator muscle. Lacrimal apparatus lesions include dislocation of the lacrimal gland and lacerations of lacrimal passages, especially the canaliculi. Optic nerve injuries, these are commonly associated with fractures of the base of skull. These may be in the form of traumatic papillitis, lacerations of optic nerve sheath hemorrhage, and avulsion of the optic nerve from the back of the eye. Orbital injury, there may occur fractures of orbital walls, commonest being the blowout fracture of the orbital wall. Orbital hemorrhage may produce sudden proptosis. Orbital emphysema may occur following ethmoidal sinus rupture. Sympathetic ophthalmitis. Sympathetic ophthalmitis is a serious bilateral granulomatous panuveitis, which follows as penetrating ocular trauma. The injured eye is called the exciting eye, and the fellow eye, which also develops uveitis, is called a sympathizing eye. Very rarely, sympathetic ophthalmitis can also occur following its intraocular surgery. Incidence of sympathetic ophthalmitis has markedly decreased in the recent years due to meticulous repair of the injured eye using microsurgical techniques and use of potent steroids. Etiology of sympathetic ophthalmitis is still not known exactly. However, the facts related with its occurrence are as follows. Predisposing factors, it almost always follows a penetrating injury. Wounds in the ciliary region, the so-called danger zone, are more prone to it. Wounds with incarceration of the iris, ciliary body, or lens capsule are more vulnerable. It is more common in children than in adults. It does not occur when actual suppuration develops in the injured eye. Pathogenesis, various theories have been put forward. Most accepted one is the allergic theory. which postulates that the uveal pigment acts as an allergen and excites plastic uveitis in the sound eye. Pathology: it is characteristic of granulomatous uveitis, that is, there is nodular aggregation of lymphocytes, plasma cells, and epithelioid cells, and giant cells scattered throughout the uveal tract. Dehlen-Fuchs nodules are formed due to the proliferation of pigment epithelium of the iris, ciliary body, and choroid, associated with invasion by the lymphocytes and epithelioid cells. Sympathetic perivasculitis. Retina shows perivascular cellular infiltration. Clinical features: exciting injured eye. It shows clinical features of persistent low grade plastic uveitis, which includes ciliary congestion, lacrimation, and tenderness. Keratic precipitates may be present in the back at the back of the cornea. This is a dangerous sign. Sympathizing sound eye. It is usually involved after 4 to 8 weeks of injury in the other eye. Earliest reported case is after 9 days of injury. Most of the cases occur within the first year. However, delayed and very late cases are also reported. Sympathetic ophthalmitis almost always manifests as acute plastic iridocyclitis. Rarely it may manifest as neuroretinitis or choroiditis. Clinical features of iridocyclitis in sympathizing eye can be divided into two stages: prodromal stage and fully developed stage. Prodromal stage: symptoms: sensitivity to light, photophobia, and transient indistinctness of near objects due to weakening of accommodation are the earliest signs. Signs in this stage: the first sign may be presence of retrolental flare and cells or the presence of few keratic precipitates on the back of the cornea. Other signs include mild ciliary congestion, slight tenderness of the globe, fine vitreous haze, and disc edema, which is seen occasionally. The fully developed stage. It is clinically characterized by typical signs and symptoms consistent with acute plastic iridocyclitis. Treatment: first, prophylaxis. Early accession of the injured eye. It is the best prophylaxis when there is no chance of saving useful vision. Second, when there is hope of saving useful vision, following steps should be taken. A meticulous repair of the wound using microsurgical technique should be carried out, taking great care that uveal tissue is not incarcerated in the wound. Immediate expectant treatment with topical as well as systemic steroids and antibiotics, along with topical atropine, should be started. When the uveitis is not controlled after 2 weeks of expectant treatment, that is lacrimation, photophobia, and ciliary congestion persist, and if the keratin precipitates appear, this injured eye should be excised immediately. Treatment when sympathetic ophthalmitis is already supervened. Early excision should be done, enucleation should be done when the case is seen shortly after the onset of inflammation, that is in the prodromal stage, if in the sympathizing eye and the injured eye has no useful vision. This useless eye should be excised at once. Conservative treatment of sympathetic ophthalmitis on the lines of iridocyclitis should be started immediately as follows. Corticosteroids should be administered by all routes, that is, systemic, periocular injections, and frequent installation of topical drops. Immunosuppressant drugs should be started in severe cases without delay. Atropine should be instilled 3 times a day in all cases. Note: the treatment should be continued for a long time. Prognosis: if the sympathetic ophthalmitis is diagnosed early, that is during the prodromal stage, and immediate treatment with steroids is started, a useful vision may be obtained. However, in advanced cases, prognosis is very poor even after the best treatment. We are done with mechanical injuries, so now we'll start non-mechanical injuries. Chemical injuries. Chemical injuries are by no means uncommon. These vary in severity from a trivial and transient irritation of little significance to complete and sudden loss of vision. Modes of chemical injury. These usually occur due to external contact with chemicals under the following circumstances: domestic accidents, example with ammonia, solvents, detergents, and cosmetics. Agricultural accidents, example due to fertilizers, insecticides, toxins of vegetable and animal origin. Chemical laboratory accidents with acids and alkalis. Deliberate chemical attacks, especially with acids, to disfigure the face. Chemical warfare injuries. Self inflicted chemical injuries are seen in malingerers and psychopaths. Types of chemical injuries. In general, the serious chemical burns mainly comprise alkali and acid burns. Alkali burns are among the most severe chemical injuries known to ophthalmologists. Common alkalis responsible for burns are lime, usually fresh wood tar or whitewash, calcium hydroxide, caustic potash, that is potassium hydroxide, caustic soda, which is sodium hydroxide, and ammonia, NH2OH. Liquid ammonia is most harmful. Mechanisms of damage produced by alkalis include the alkalis dissociate and saponify fatty acids of the cell membrane and therefore destroy the structure of cell membrane of the tissues. Being hygroscopic, they extract water from the cells, a factor which contributes to total necrosis. They combine with lipids of cells to form soluble compounds which produce a conditioned softening and gelatinization. The above effects resulting in increased deep penetration of alkalis into the tissues. Alkali burns therefore spread widely. Their action continues for some days and their effects are difficult to circumscribe. Hence, prognosis in such cases must always be guarded. Acid burns. Acid burns are less serious than alkali burns. Common acids responsible for burns are sulfuric acid, H2SO4, used in inverter batteries and various industries. Hydrofluoric acid used in glass etching and cleaning. Hydrochloric acid, nitric acid. Chemical effects. Strong acids cause instant coagulation of all the proteins, which then act as barriers and prevent deeper penetration of acids into the tissues. Thus, the lesions become sharply demarcated. Clinical features. It can be divided into three stages. Stage of acute ischemic necrosis. In this stage, conjunctiva shows marked edema, congestion, widespread necrosis, and copious purulent discharge. Cornea develops widespread sloughing of the epithelium, edema, and opalescence of the stroma. The extent of damage depends upon the concentration of chemical and duration of contact, and type of chemical. Alkali burns are more severe than acid burns. In mild to moderate degree of corneal burns, end result is corneal opacification of varying degrees. In severe cases, the whole cornea may slough out, followed by staphyloma formation. Iris becomes violently inflamed, and in severe cases, both iris and ciliary body are replaced by granulation tissue. Grading of chemical burns. Depending upon the severity of damage caused to the limbus and cornea, the extent of chemical burns may be graded in Roper Hall classification as follows. Grade 1 is mild, there is no limbal ischemia, the cornea is clear, and the visual prognosis is excellent. Grade 2 is moderate, less than one third limbal ischemia, hazy cornea but iris details visible, good visual prognosis. Grade 3 is severe, one third to half limbal ischemia. Opaque cornea, iris details obscured. Visual prognosis is doubtful or guarded. Grade 4 is very severe, more than half. Corneal appearance opaque. No view of iris and pupils. Visual prognosis poor. So this was the Roper Hall classification. There's Dua's classification. So here we have a table about Dua's classification. So the stage 2, the second stage, is the stage of reparation. In this stage, conjunctival and corneal epithelium regenerate. There occurs corneal vascularization and inflammation of the iris subsides. Stage 3 is the stage of complications. This is characterized by development of symblepharon, recurrent corneal ulceration, and development of complicated cataract and secondary glaucoma. Treatment of chemical burns. First, prevent further damage by following measures. Immediate and thorough copious irrigation with available clean water or saline delivered through an IV tubing. Deliver minimum of 2 liters of water in 20 to 30 minutes or until pH is restored. Note, If irrigation is delayed, prognosis worsens. So do not waste time on history and examination of the patient. It should be done after irrigation. Mechanical removal of contaminant. If any particles are left behind, particularly in the case of lime, these should be removed carefully with the help of forceps under topical anesthesia. Double eversion of the upper eyelid must be done to look for and to remove the trapped particles from the superior fornix. Debridement of contaminated and necrotic tissue. Necrosed conjunctiva should be excised. Contaminated and necrosed corneal epithelium should be removed with a cotton bud to promote reepithelialization. Maintenance of favorable conditions for rapid and uncomplicated healing. Aim is to reduce inflammation, prevent corneal melt, and promote reepithelialization. Treatment should include topical antibiotic drops like moxifloxacin 4 to 6 times a day to prevent infection, steroid eye drops to reduce inflammation, neutrophil infiltration, and address anterior uveitis. Cautious use is recommended after 2 weeks as steroids may interfere with collagen synthesis. After 3 weeks, there is no fibroblast migration in the cornea, so if required, steroids can be again used. Cycloplegics like atropine may improve the comfort. Ascorbic acid in the form of 10% sodium ascorbate eye drops 4 to 5 times along with systemic use 1 to 2 grams orally per day improves wound healing and promotes synthesis of mature collagen by corneal fibroblasts. Lubricant eye drops, preservative free, should be used in abundance to promote healing. Autologous serum instilled as eye drops provides growth factors, collagenase inhibitors, retinoic acid, fibrinogen activator, and promotes epithelial healing. Sodium citrate used as 10% topical eye drops stabilizes neutrophils and reduces collagenase release. Doxycycline 100 mg BD chelates zinc, which is necessary for collagenase. Third, prevention of symblepharon can be done by using glass shell or sweeping a glass rod in the fornices twice daily. Treatment of complications are as below. Secondary glaucoma should be treated with a topical 0.5% timolol instilled twice a day along with oral acetazolamide 250 mg 3 to 4 times a day. Poor corneal healing with limbal stem cell deficiency may be treated by amniotic membrane transplantation with or without limbal stem cell transplantation. Amniotic membrane transplantation helps by promoting epithelialization, preventing symblepharon formation. Pseudopterygium, when formed, should be excised together with conjunctival autograft. If adequate host conjunctiva or amniotic membrane facilitated by antimitotic drugs like mitomycin C. Symblepharon needs surgical treatment. Corneal opacity may be treated by keratoplasty. If adequate, should be delayed for at least 6 months to allow maximum resolution of inflammation. Keratoprosthesis remains a surgical option in severely damaged eyes where keratoplasty is not possible. Thermal injuries. Thermal injuries are usually caused by fire or hot fluids. The main brunt of such injuries lies on the lids. Conjunctiva and cornea may be affected in severe cases. Treatment for burns of lids is on general lines. When cornea is affected, it should be treated with atropine, steroids, antibiotics, and lubricants. Electrical injuries. The passage of strong electric current from the area of eyes may cause following lesions. Conjunctiva becomes congested. Cornea develops punctate or diffuse interstitial opacities. Iris and ciliary body are inflamed. Uveitis. Lens may develop electric cataract after 2 to 4 months of accident. Retina may show multiple hemorrhages. Optic nerve may develop neuritis. Extraocular muscles may develop palsies, leading to diplopia or restricted ocular movements. Radiational injuries, ultraviolet radiations and infrared radiations, and ionizing radiation injuries. Ultraviolet radiations. Ultraviolet radiations are those with wavelength less than 400 nanometers. Ozone layer in the atmosphere absorbs most of the destructive UV light. However, depletion of ozone layer may cause damage by UV radiation. Damage to ocular tissues caused by UV radiation include lid lesions, corneal lesions. Lid lesions. Acute sunburn reactions occur on the skin of lids. Skin malignancies reported to be induced by UV radiations include basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, malignant melanoma. Other skin lesions due to UV radiation include epidermal keratosis, sebaceous hyperplasia. Corneal lesions. Photoophthalmia or photokeratitis is caused by UVB radiation. Pterygium has been linked to chronic exposure to ultraviolet rays. Spheroidal degeneration of cornea is also linked with chronic exposure to ultraviolet rays. Age-related cataract. Chronic exposure to UVB radiations in field workers has been blamed to be the cause of early occurrence of age-related cataract. Infrared radiations. These may cause solar macular burns, that is solar retinopathy. The third type of radiation, ionizing radiational injuries. These are caused by following radiotherapy to tumors in the vicinity of the eyes. The common ocular lesions include radiation keratoconjunctivitis, radiation dermatitis of lids, radiation cataract, and radiation retinopathy. Done. Thank you for listening.